Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roane Hunter. Let's jump right in.
Roane, back in the saddle.
Once again, man, I just think let's quit our paying jobs and do this full time. What do you think?
Hey, don't tempt me with a good time.
I'm in.
Yeah. Every time I listen back, I'm like, man, I really enjoy doing this. And as we always say, the fact that our listeners are reaching out and encouraging us for the work that we're doing, that makes every bit of this work worth it. Even the vulnerability behind Mike about our own family circumstances, this is the real talk that actually makes a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, man, it is, it is encouraging when people talk about how the episode, that episode was so helpful, or boy, I loved what you guys did with this or whatever. There's kind of a surreal quality to that. And then it just how we've grown and just, the listeners, and really, now I guess in the top 10% of all podcasts, that just sounds crazy.
It really does.
When I say that out loud, I don't know. Yeah.
Over 15,000 downloads at the time of this recording, and that's enough to celebrate in and of itself. But the moments that are so special for me to hear about are when husband and wife swap episodes, or especially when father and son sit down and say, hey, son, I need you to hear this. This is what I've been trying to say, right?
Oh, yeah.
These guys just have a microphone and can bat back and forth about it. So we're committed to doing this for the long haul. You listeners that are with us on this episode, if it's your first time joining us, welcome, buckle up. It's going to be an intense conversation, especially today. If you've been with us for a while, we do want to say, take some time, if you don't mind, go over and rate the podcast, write a review. Most listeners are going to read those reviews before they jump in, before that title catches their attention. It would be a huge help to us. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, please put that there. That would be amazing. To have a community that's willing to be digitally vulnerable would be fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know, if you're a guy and you were on Spotify and you just put sex in the search engine, you found us.
Yes.
Man, put that on the
Please
review.
do.
We would love to hear that story. That'd be beautiful. Yeah.
So related to this, we debated about launching into this topic because it's the danger zone for us. So let's admit that from the jump. But we're looking to roll into maybe a few episodes that just attack some buzzwords that are thrown around both inside Christian areas and also recovery areas. And we just assume that people understand what these words mean. Our problem is the way those words are lived out a lot of times are not very authentic. So today we're going to attack the word, brace yourself, listeners, community. We're attacking the word community. We actually love community, which is why we're recording this episode, but the way that it is used is often irresponsible.
Yeah, it's like, are we attacking it or are we embracing it? I don't know, somewhere around there, because, man, so often, we talk about it all the time in really everything we do, whether it's in the counseling office or in group settings. It's the idea that the cure for what ails you is connection. It is community, connected with others that are on the same page, singing from the same hymn book, moving in the same direction. That is going to be your best avenue for growth, for healing, and for change. And we know it. We've seen it. I've been at this 34 years. And obviously I recommend counseling highly recommend that.
Right.
However, I've said it, often, putting myself out of a job because I do believe if you get in a healthy men's community of men that get this stuff, not just get being sober, which is certainly priority. However, the deeper stuff of real recovery, recovering the life that God intended, this idea of becoming whole, becoming mature, everything that Jesus talked about, he actually talked more than about those types of things than he did. He even talk about getting saved? I don't think he says that.
Yeah, that's well. Let's just go ahead and go there. So I know you couldn't wait.
I just can't help it.
I actually
can't help it.
Wait either. We are very direct about the role of the church in recovery, the role of the church in people's lives, and we always say, and we have to give this caveat, this commercial before we roll down this conversation. We're for the church. I mean, I'm a believing man, and I believe that the church plays a critical role in society, and that's why I'm so upset with it, because it's refused to play that role for a very long time. And the only thing that's going to change that are grown people getting behind microphones and sitting across tables in restaurants and being very honest about it. The church in the West is broken, and in a lot of other places in the world too. But when we start taking words like community and making them a pitch from a stage, we have entered into very dangerous territory. And I think when we start to water down this word to mean something akin to participate in our system in the way that we say, that's a very dangerous thing, because often that version is incredibly sanitized, and Jesus did have words for that, whitewashed. He was very direct to the religious to say, you have got it all wrong. What's happening in our society today, because we've become entrenched and polarized, the religious people are so afraid that they're losing ground. The way to gain that ground back is to try to say things that make them sound like they are different. What we're saying today is that community is an idea that is incredibly sacred, and that it cannot be bastardized and hijacked to mean incorporate into our particular system. It's so much more organic than that. So my curiosity, though, is especially for a man your age, right?
You mean a young man like me?
Young man such as yourself. How did this idea take root in your life and in your story?
Well, for me, I came to Jesus when I was 20 years old, and I didn't, in some ways, and I say this often, I'm so thankful that I do not have like the church baggage of growing up in the church. We were part of the Easter Christian denomination, which is a big one.
Oh yeah.
And so I didn't have the kind of the religious baggage that I hear so often in the counseling office. And then when I did come to Jesus, man, it was real, because for a 20-year-old frat boy to quit drinking, cussing, and smoking, dude, that's serious.
That's
right?
a big deal.
I'm going to be a good Baptist because I'm in the South. I'm in Mississippi. There's nothing else. And so I was all in. We started going to church. And I mean, it's like we were still very broken, but it was like in some ways, we were searching for something there that we didn't really find. What we did find was like certainly some level of connection, because in each city that we lived in, the people in our Sunday school classes, for you the younger crowd, you don't even know what that is.
Now they're called community groups.
Oh, yes. I mean, I tell our very contemporary church pastors often, like, man, it would be great to have a good old Sunday school class. And a lot of young couples actually that we see in counseling, they ask about, like, whatever happened to Sunday school? Because for us, it is where we did find what we would have called community. And I mean, basically, the people in those Sunday school classes were our friends. And, we're all of the same age and having babies and all the good stuff that's happening. And so we did experience friendship there. But I would say, especially knowing what I know today, we did not experience what I would call, what we're talking about is this idea of like community on a deep level.
So there are layers to it, because I think this is important, because we have seen when people come out of the bushes, as we say, and they're starting a life of authenticity. They're just looking for connection anywhere. And we would not advocate, well, no, the local bar is where you want to go for that. Don't go to church. Like, we would say, no, get to church. Like, find some people. You're hopefully going to accidentally run into some people that have started a journey to recovery there, whether the entire system embraces it or not. So there are layers of what community actually means, which leads to our next point of conversation, I think, in that it is a process. You learn how to be in community much like you learn how to ride a bicycle, or you learn how to, in a healthy way, communicate with your spouse. There's a process to it that is actually dependent upon a group of people committed to a process, and that's kind of where the rub is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think for us, just for me in particular, I mean, we're very active and very involved in going to church, and there was certainly a connection. But then when all hell broke loose, and I admitted to Eva, I just, my full-blown sexual addiction, and then, when I got into therapy, talking to my therapist, the first thing he's telling me is, Roane, you got to find a group. I don't even think he called it community, but, I got to find a group. And, man, finding a group, that was a whole endeavor in and of itself. But again, when you're talking about the process and growth, as I did begin to find groups dealing with this specific issue, it was going to another level, obviously, because now, these groups that I was a part of, we're talking about real stuff. And, but most of the groups, early on, it was just focused on the sin. It was focused on the bad behavior. It was focused on, checking in about, acting out. And really they were recovery groups, 12-step groups, but it was really more like in church world, we would call it an accountability group, which is like
terrifying.
That's depressing. Because accountability groups are typically nothing more than sin management, right? And when I hear that word, I get kind of triggered, which is another word that triggers me. The word trigger, yeah. But there's something in me, because like the way accountability was done back in the day was terrible. I always felt like in any group that I was in early on in church world, that I was the project, because nobody else was talking about anything, but they were going to pray for me, and they were, thank you for telling us that or whatever. And it's like, man. And so it was terrible from the church standpoint, but in the recovery groups, there certainly was a level of sharing that was much deeper, and it was two-way. And I think that's one of the things I see so often in what we would call, I guess, church community groups. It's usually pretty one way, or it's some level of accountability, and it's not going deeper into what's really going on, into why you are wanting to act out or why you are acting out. What's up underneath this? Because most of those guys in that world, they've never done their work. Whereas when you go over on the recovery side, most guys that were in those groups were all engaged in counseling and on some level, and now we're in groups talking about this stuff in a deeper way, a more holistic way, a more transformative way than what we were talking about in the church groups. It's just and really, I think it's until you experience kind of both, and it's hard to know the difference.
It does confuse people. And I would say, to follow up there, the people in religious communities have done a lot of work. It's just not healthy work. It's work to cover up the brokenness. And I have of late, and by that I mean the past probably close to decade, become very nervous of groups of people that assemble around religion, and very attracted to groups that assemble around brokenness, because I know in those groups there's freedom and there's authenticity, and it is a two-way street. The religious groups are a one-way street for brokenness. And that is more damaging, I believe, than any of the good that they're doing otherwise, which I know is a very large statement. But if we have people that are wandering into buildings hoping to find hope, and they get condemnation rather than curiosity, I don't care how many trips you take to Haiti or any other foreign country, you are doing more damage locally than you are doing good abroad. And that bothers me, and it started to bother me more and more. And this word community, I realized we were using it, a lot of us in the Christian community, just to sell programs. And now that I've experienced authentic community, that makes me sad and angry at the same time. That if we say connection is the cure for everything that ails us, and we're giving a false connection to people, then we are just as bad as the others who perpetrate injustice upon other people. We just don't like to sit under the accountability. So it doesn't mean that every community is perfect. And one thing I love about the community we sit in is, especially when we're running events, one of the first things we say is, this is an imperfect community made of...
Because we're here.
Because we are here. Like if you were looking for the perfect poster of community, we can give you a couple of addresses, but it is not here,
Amen.
Right? We have stumbled into this circle together. People who have found bread are continuing to find bread. So part of my question is for the people who are listening who say, okay, I don't want to be isolated anymore. And apparently there's something good that happens in gatherings of people that are called community. How do I know what to look for?
Well, I think, we talk about it often, the idea of what's a safe person? I think we need to start there. A lot of times, and again, just like in church circles, and again, this is just my experience. Please email Ben if you've been to great churches where this was not your experience. I'm just talking about my own.
Okay.
Where so often it was not safe because you admit something, you talk about something, and then the worst thing that could ever happen to you was to be put on the prayer list, right? I mean that's you don't ever want to be on the prayer list.
Yeah, if your name is mentioned in church on a Wednesday, not because you're there, but because you're on the sheet of paper.
Yeah, not good.
Unless
Never
you're
good.
in the hospital.
Never good.
Never good.
But again, that's not a safe place, right? And a safe person, because if you don't have safe people there, it's not going to be a safe place. A safe person is someone that is able to hold confidence. Probably the number one requirement of being a safe person is like you understand and value confidentiality, and what somebody tells you doesn't go any further. And you're not the Bible answer man. You're not an answer to an unasked question. It's the worst thing in life. You're not giving advice. You're just able to like hold confidence. You're able to listen. You're able to sit with that person, and you're able to just look at somebody and say, man, I hear you. I get it. I'm with you. Thank you for sharing that. Right. And it's that idea of safety is so important because it's the building block of trust. And if I don't trust, I'm going to always be guarded. And so often, in some ways, I believe we feel like this church thing is just not a safe place. And so I've got to understand who safe people are, and then I got to really work to find them. And I mean, they are out there. There's no doubt. And finding a community of safe people, a lot of times it takes some searching, because oftentimes you walk into the men's Bible study or into the men's breakfast, the men's prayer breakfast, the men's group meeting at church. And I think the way I would kind of describe it is if you've got guys that are just getting, buck naked, not literally, that
Right.
would be
Emotionally.
Don't go to church there. Run from that. But just emotionally, man, they're not holding back. They're talking about their struggles. They're talking about their fears, their anxiety, their grief, their losses, the hardness of life. Because number one thing we all need to learn is that life is hard. Every day with Jesus is not sweeter than the day before, and so it needs to be an environment where you hear a level of honesty that is just real and raw. And it's like, and we've seen it in our groups where, man, a guy comes in and he's just like, he's never experienced it. But boy, that rawness, that realness hits the deck, and men especially are so hungry for it. And boy, they just begin to eat it up.
That's right. I tell guys, if you'll know you found the right place when you're sitting in that circle, and based on the masculine exchange, and we could even say for women, like gender, sitting in those groups, because that's happening too. It ought to excite you and scare the hell out of you at the same time. If it does that, then we're getting close, right? Because there are people who are being extremely vulnerable, and they're talking about the real stuff that's going on in their life. And not to graze too far up against this, but I'm a guy that'll open up the Bible and talk about it all day long, and I'll do that to keep you from asking me questions about my heart and my life. I'll use it as a shield, and there's a lot of that going on. Now, I will say there are a lot of safe people inside of church lobbies, but I'm with you. You have to look for them, and they're going to look a lot different than the person on stage. A lot different. They're going to be quiet, unassuming. They're going to be there to become better people, to see what they can graze and learn, and they're going to be engaging with other people in the community in an authentic way. And unfortunately, that's going to look a lot different, predominantly a lot different than a staff member.
It is. I mean, and again, you've been there. I'm
talking about myself here. I'm not throwing rocks.
No,
I'm talking about me.
I always say, look, man, if I was on staff at a church, I would be the worst, because I would be so afraid somebody was going to find out about who I really am, and then they're going to shoot me and take me outside, gut me, and then eat me, because that's what Christians do to their wounded today.
Yes.
But because, if you get honest in that role, if you just go there, chances are you're going to get fired, right? And I always say, man, look, I like my stuff and I want more. I would be the worst. I wouldn't tell anybody anything.
Self-preservation is a very strong instinct.
Yes. And it's and I get it, right? However, if you are in that role, you better be working to find your safe community, because that's not sustainable. We see that every day, right?
Yep.
The guy that's just trying to sustain that. And that's true for any of us as men. Man, just wearing the mask, playing the role, projecting the persona, and then, we can only keep that beach ball underwater for some period of time, and it's coming out.
Yeah. When you start to sit with other people and experience that, it is pretty addictive. Which I know is a dangerous word on this podcast.
Oh yeah, but it's a good addiction,
It is a good addiction, because you feel all of those primary needs. You do feel chosen and blessed, added life to. You do feel heard and understood. And we have to challenge a lot of people, both men and women, especially in our area of the country. If you can't find it, you might have to make it. And you have to take, this is a big word for us, initiative. You have to initiate. We see a lot of wounded individuals in our area, and I'm sure this is the same across the world, which thankfully we have people listening all across the world.
Yes, we do. Thank you to our international listeners.
Yes, we see a lot of people that are wounded and are inadvertently, perhaps subconsciously playing victim, going victim. Well, I don't have a group here. I don't have anybody at my job, or I don't have anybody at my church that gets this. They don't understand. Sometimes you have to go first. You have to build what you want. That's been the story of human history. If you don't have it, build it.
If you build it, they will come.
Exactly.
Yep.
And especially the world is a much smaller place now. You can find groups that are online happening nearly every hour, and you can teach other people how to do this. But you do have to have a certain level of confidence and curiosity about your own story. That blocks people as well, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, we talk about it often. It's like, man, this idea of awareness. I've got to become aware of like my story, of what I didn't get growing up, what I did get. I mean, the good and the bad, because all of those things play into how we got to where we got to, and if I don't begin to look back and understand what was going on up underneath, it's like the facts, the impact, and the track. What was the impact of the facts that happened in my life growing up? What the impact relationally and emotionally, and then what track did it set me on relationally and emotionally? Because it does. The circumstances, the experience that we have, man, it sets us up. And then all of a sudden we wake up, and I always say nobody like raises your hand in the fifth grade when the teacher said, "Okay, kids, who wants to grow up and be an alcoholic? Raise your hand. Who wants to grow up and be cheat on your wife? Raise your hand, boys." Like nobody sets out on this journey to become that, right?
Right. But
somehow we got there, and a lot of times I think in churchianity, we don't realize all of us, the propensity, the capacity in the right circumstances, when Jupiter aligns with Mars, the planets align, my capability to commit horrendous acts. We all have it. It's all there. Scripture's very clear about it, and that's wisdom, right? But man, we just think we're good Christians and getting better and better and praying harder and reading my Bible more and more knowledge. Like, no, that's not how this works, man. I've got to be aware. Jesus talked about it all the time. I've got to become aware of what's going on inside of me. Where's this coming from? Why am I doing what I'm doing? If I'm going to change it, that's the only way it works.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Actually, let me make a statement. I will tell you that my wife, Roane, is my community. What do you say?
Well, I can't say it on the microphone, but there's...
That was a clear setup.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Man, I hear that.
Me too.
Oh, you do too.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, man, that ain't the way it's supposed to be. But so many men, we would put all of our emotional eggs in the wife basket, and man, that's not good. Now, it's good if you are like in denial, and if you are pretending, and if you are wearing a mask.
It's effective.
And you're projecting the persona as the perfect husband. But chances are that ain't real. And chances are the guy that's doing that, he's got other stuff going on that nobody probably knows about, including his wife, who he's like, that's his best friend.
Yeah.
And we would just say BS, not BF, because there's just no way that that you're going to be able to just even navigate life without other men in your life. It's like every marriage has a weight limit. There's only so much weight you can put on that bridge. And I've got to have other bridges with men, not other women. That would not be good.
No.
That are going to encourage me, support me, walk with me. Because as men, we get it. We understand each other. Women are, they're actually a different species. Their brains wired different. I mean, there's
Thank
like,
God they're different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is the other. That's
Yes.
why we always say, like, gay marriage, there's not much to that because there's no other. I mean, two dudes like living together, married, that's a joke, right? I mean, yeah, guys can sit around and grunt, and it's like, yeah, okay. But like, no, the other is what brings the rub, which is the growth area for all of us as men to like, man, to change, to understand relationships better, all the things that as men left to our own devices, I guess we would just name some animals and tend the garden like Adam, and we would be okay, right?
Yeah, to be able to say to your spouse, you are a place for me to experience community, but you are not the only place for me to experience community. And I know we always dive off as I'm editing these episodes. I'm like, hey, Ben, why don't you save that for your therapy session? I think this matters, though, today. In the beginning, it was very disruptive in my marriage to be able to say those kinds of things. But over time, my wife was very grateful that I was letting her off the hook of being my emotional manager. Both inside of the bedroom and outside of the bedroom, she was the only person I had to truly try to regulate my dysregulated emotions. And man, I was wearing her out. And she has a huge capacity to help me. But when she experienced other men coming around me, same gender relationships, shoring things up and calling me out for things and validating and encouraging me in those things, community was such a balm to me and also to our marriage. But man, it took a lot of work to try to find it. And then I fell into the trap of creating it and then being the guy in the group that's always got the answers, which was just like a chameleon, isn't it? Set yourself up as the leader. I know,
leader.
Yeah, people just, man, they love to follow you. I'm like, well, I love when they do follow me.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
I don't have to share much.
Nobody's asking you any hard questions.
I could go through 15 straight groups and never say a word about my life.
Yeah.
So this is kind of generally how the communities that we would promote work. You show up on a regular basis. Our good friend Eli Machen said this in episode 7. You just keep showing up to the show up place. You show up at regular intervals and you get rigorously honest about where you are. Those are the major tenets of what we're saying here, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, you can start showing up at a group and just kind of sit there and be a wallflower, right? Now, in our groups, that doesn't last very long because we're going to start like, so dude, what, dude? The dude question, right? Like, man, what's going on?
Do the women's group say that?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think they go do that maybe.
Well, yeah.
But it's like you've got to start opening up because part of that is we don't want a serial killer sitting in our group just kind of holding space, right? I want to get to know this guy that's sitting there next to me because, what we do, it's not church. I mean, you probably got 3 or 4 serial killers sitting around you at church. Nobody knows anybody other than, hey man, how are you? Great, fine, good. See you next Sunday.
Yep.
But that's part of the problem, right? There's no knowing. And, what happens in our community is like, some guys, they keep showing up, they start opening up, they start talking, and, it's like at first you're like, man, that guy's a weird duck, right? And I always say, there's weird sheep, right? There's weird sheep in church. And my hope is that the weird sheep, they find each other over in the pasture somewhere and they got their own group. But what happens, and this happens to me all the time, guy shows up and we're natural judges, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can refrain from speaking it out loud. But we're constantly evaluating, and the guy shows up and you're like, man, this guy, he's never going to be able to connect with a human being. What's amazing, and I don't know, maybe I'm getting less judgy or I need to, but like the guy shows up and he keeps showing up, and then over time it's like, dang, I like this guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the guy's showing up, he's doing the deal, he's being honest, and then you begin to figure out why he's a little quirky when he first showed up, because, dude, you learn his story, and it's amazing that the guy's even survived what he survived growing up, whatever it is. But it's like, man, everybody's got a story, and as we get to know him, you actually you like people.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that works. And so I think it's just a matter of like showing up, and certainly in a group where like you need people kind of pushing you. That's what we call it. Dude, can I push you? And we're asking questions along the lines of like being curious, right? Like, we don't start out with like, dude, why'd you say that, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to shut down. But if you say something like, man, you when you were talking about your dad, gosh, help me understand more about what you said when you said this. And so now I'm being curious, and I'm drawing the guy out. And as guys get drawn out and they experience kind of non-judgmental feedback, it's amazing what happens, because I think that's what we're all longing for, deep down. I just want to be able to talk and not somebody, tell me that I'm crazy, or why do you feel that way?
That's it.
That's what wives, that's their job, right? Sorry.
Sometimes. Sometimes we need it.
Yeah, Eva's not here today, obviously.
You're a loose cannon.
I know, I'm out of control. But certainly, it's that non-judgmental atmosphere that I believe is what creates a safe group. And certainly, man, we know that like the scripture's very clear. It is your kindness that leads us to repentance.
I love teaching that verse these days.
It's not us shaming somebody into submission and obedience, but it's the kindness of God. It's the kindness of Jesus with skin on, as we just like, man, I love you, I'm with you, right? Keep showing up. And it's amazing how when you keep showing up, and this is, old recovery saying, the magic happens. And dude, we've seen it. We've seen it in our men's group. I experienced that this week with a guy that like had not seen him, and probably since, I don't know, it's been 5-6 months. And at the time, it was just like, oh gosh, man, this guy, I don't think he'll ever get it. And I saw him this week, and it's like, dude, the magic is happening. I mean, it was incredible because he's kind of doubled down on showing up and gotten involved in other groups. Got a guy doing coaching with him, and his wife is kind of like, she's quit beating the divorce drum, and evidently that's a great sign, because she's certainly seen it, and she's experiencing him differently. I mean, he hadn't arrived, neither have I, none of us have, but boy, it's like it's kind of a 100% money back guarantee.
That's
really.
it.
Yep.
So I think for the listeners' sake, if we could cull it down, as we would say here in the American South, we're looking for characteristics of this group of people. One that we've mentioned already would be curiosity. If you're in a group that is really consumed with handing more and more information to you and doesn't give you an opportunity to speak or for you to hear other people speak, that's not a great sign. The other side of it, I think, in what marks the communities that we have begun and that are keeping on going and spreading, actually, is compassion. I don't know that there's any more beautiful moment than when a person shares very vulnerably about their life, and then they see another person across the way look at them and say, man, when you shared that about that moment with your son, I hurt for you. I hurt for him. That it really made me emotional to think about it. And we don't hijack the story as if like, well, let me tell mine now. Or at least we shouldn't do that.
Your story reminds me of me.
That's
let me
right.
talk about me, because I really love me.
I need to hear more about me. Yeah. But to have,
I know that guy.
To have someone come alongside you, say, man, that impacted me at an emotional level. And I'm not even trying to share facts with you to try to make that feel better. I just need you to know I'm with you. I'm with you in that. Nobody's left the room. There's so much healing in that. I feel like if we could just do that more people would back up off the ledge and they would engage in this if they could just have that experience of compassion,
Dude,
right?
Well said.
Why aren't we handing that out more is a big question that I have.
Well, when you think about just like what you just shared, and it really is the practice of intimacy, right? Now in our men's groups, I always have to clarify, intimacy is not sex. Intimacy is the idea of knowing and being known, the emotional connection. And just that kind of what you just talked about, the glue of connection is empathy and vulnerability, right? Those two things. And so when a guy goes vulnerable, right, and talks about things he's never talked about before, and then somebody looks at him and says, man, dude, I get it. Boy, and what you shared resonated with me, tapped into so much of my own story. And boy, I thank you. I appreciate that. Well, now that's empathy, right? Feeling with the other. And so if I'm doing that on a consistent basis in a safe group with men, well, guess what? I can actually, that's the practice of intimacy. And then I can go home and I can get in the game with my wife, because now I'm actually doing it rather than hearing it in a sermon. And it actually worked.
Man, there were so many comments that I had loaded, and then you threw that sermon thing at me. I felt a little bit judged.
you preached it before.
Yeah. Well, it's why I'm so passionate about sitting behind this microphone, and quite honestly, in a moment of vulnerability, it feels risky at times to talk about things the way that we do. But we know what's at stake. We know the danger. We see people all around us, and people that are listening to this right now who have attempted to find community, and really they're ushered into a program and they're asked to either give or work. And that's not going to help heal the human heart. What's going to heal the human heart is sitting in circles week after week after week after week and being seen and accepted and having those incorrect, false, and evil messages that have been written over the human heart dismembered by acceptance, curiosity, grace, lack of judgment. Those are the things that are going to make the difference for the long haul. We know this how? Because we see it happening.
It's just, man, and that's the beauty of it. When you actually experience it consistently, regularly, you actually visibly see somebody's whole countenance change over the course of a weekend, or just, man, sitting in groups over time. I think of so many guys that first showed up and boy, just kind of had the look of Eeyore or something. Just no, dude, it's
over.
Painful.
Yeah.
And then over time, man, seeing that guy shoulders back, the Jordan Peterson, lobsters holding their shoulders straight. I love that story, right? But it's man, you actually see a difference visibly because now they're losing the shame. They're walking out of the shame. They're developing shame resilience and beginning to live life. I believe, Saint Irenaeus, I think the glory of God is a man fully alive, right? All of me. Wholeness, good and bad, integrated together, no longer in hiding, but man, walking with God and others in a real way.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.